The transport shuttle hummed as it approached the massive warship hanging in space. Captain Daniel Hayes pressed his face against the window, watching the horizon's edge grow larger with each passing second. The ship was huge, nearly 2 miles long, built by 3 different alien species working together. Its hull gleamed under the distant stars, covered in armor plating that looked both beautiful and deadly. "First time seeing a coalition ship up close?" Lieutenant Sophie Martinez asked from the seat beside him. She was younger than Daniel, maybe 28, with bright eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "First time being assigned to one," Daniel replied. "You?" "Same. I studied alien cultures at the academy, but this is different. This is real." The shuttle docked with a soft thud. The airlock cycled open, and 20 human soldiers stepped into their new home. The corridor beyond was wide enough for 4 humans to walk side by side, but it felt cramped when a Kryn warrior walked past. The reptilian soldier stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales that clicked softly as he moved. He glanced at the humans with yellow eyes, nodded once, and continued on his way. "They're bigger in person," Sophie whispered. Daniel had to agree. He had seen plenty of aliens during training, but serving alongside them was different. The Kryn were warriors, bred for combat on a high-gravity world. Their strength was legendary. Beside them, humans looked small and weak. A voice crackled through the corridor speakers. "All new personnel report to the main briefing room. Deck 7, Section 4. The humans followed the signs. Moving through corridors filled with aliens they had only read about in textbooks. Insectoid Zithar scuttled along walls with their 6 legs. Felkar engineers floated past in their environment suits, their gaseous bodies swirling behind transparent helmets. A group of Vryn medics, tall and thin with gray skin, nodded politely as the humans passed. The briefing room was enormous. Nearly 300 soldiers filled the space, representing all 12 species of the coalition. The humans took seats near the back, trying not to draw attention. A Zithar officer stood at the front of the room. His exoskeleton was dark blue, almost black, and covered in scars that spoke of countless battles. 2 of his 4 arms held data tablets while the other 2 gestured as he spoke. "I am High Commander Noreth," he said. His voice came through a translator attached to his chest, turning his clicking sounds into words everyone could understand. "You are aboard the Horizon's Edge. Our mission is simple. We patrol the outer reach and keep the Devourers from advancing into Coalition space." The room fell silent at the mention of the Devourers. Everyone knew about them, the parasitic hive mind race that consumed entire worlds. They had been at war with the Coalition for over 60 years. "We work as one crew," Noreth continued. "Your species does not matter here. Your combat record does. Prove yourselves worthy, and you will earn respect. Fail, and you will be reassigned to support duties. Dismissed." The soldiers filed out. Daniel noticed that High Commander Noreth remained at the front, his eyes scanning the crowd. For just a moment, the commander's gaze settled on the human group. Then he looked away. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of drills and exercises. Daniel's squad was assigned to Engineering Section 7, deep in the ship's belly where the reactor cores hummed with barely contained power. They practiced emergency repairs, weapons drills, and zero-gravity combat. The work was hard, but not impossible. The other species watched the humans with curiosity. They were polite, but distant. During mealtimes in the mess hall, the different species tended to cluster together. Kryn warriors shared tables with other Kryn. Zithar officers ate with their own kind. The humans sat together at first, uncertain of their place. Sophie changed that. She was naturally friendly, and her interest in alien cultures made her brave enough to cross the invisible social lines. On the 4th week, she carried her meal tray to a table where 3 Kryn warriors sat. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. The largest Kryn, a tactical officer named Vexthal, looked at her with surprise. His scales were a deep red, unusual for his species. You wish to eat with us? If that's okay, I'd love to hear about your homeworld. Vexthal glanced at his companions, then gestured to an empty seat. Sit, but I warn you our food is much spicier than what humans can handle. Sophie grinned. I grew up in Texas. I can handle spice. That broke the ice. Within minutes, Sophie was laughing at Vexthal's stories about his training on the high-gravity world of Kryn Prime. Other soldiers began to notice. A few Felkar engineers drifted over, then some Vryn medics. Within a week, the mess hall had become a mixing ground where different species shared tables and stories. It was during one of these evening gatherings that Sophie pulled out her portable reader. I've been thinking, she said to the group around her. We all share stories from our worlds, but I haven't shared any human stories yet. What kind of stories? Asked Rin, a young Felkar engineer whose gaseous form swirled with colors that indicated curiosity. Myths, legends, the old stories that our ancestors told before we had spaceships and computers. Vexthal leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. Myths are for children. What use are ancient stories? They tell us who we are, Sophie said, where we came from, what we value. Then share one, Vexthal said. Let us hear what humans valued before they knew the stars. Sophie scrolled through her reader. This one is about a warrior named Achilles. He lived over 3,000 years ago during a great war. He was said to be the greatest fighter who ever lived, nearly invincible. Enemies feared him because defeating him seemed impossible. Seemed? Vexthal interrupted. But he was defeated. Eventually. But before that, he won battles that should have been impossible. He fought armies almost alone. Other warriors would flee just seeing him on the battlefield. Rin's colors shifted to amusement. And humans believed this? One warrior defeating armies? It's a legend, Sophie said. The truth is probably less dramatic. But the story survived because it meant something to people. Daniel joined the conversation from a nearby table. We have lots of stories like that. Warriors who stood against impossible odds. Heroes who kept fighting when everyone else gave up. Vexthal made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter. Of course humans needed such stories. You were a young species on a gentle world. You needed heroes in your imagination because you had none in reality. Other aliens nodded. A Zithar officer spoke up. My people record actual battles, real victories. We do not need to invent heroes. Sophie's smile faded slightly. Our myths aren't inventions. They're memories. Memories made larger by time and fear, Vexthal said not unkindly. It is natural. All young species create myths to feel braver. You will outgrow them. Daniel felt frustration rising in his chest, but he stayed quiet. How could he explain that human myths meant more than entertainment, that they were part of human identity in ways aliens might not understand? From the corner of the mess hall, High Commander Noreth sat alone at a small table. He had been there the whole time, eating in silence. Now his head turned slightly toward the conversation. Daniel couldn't read Zithar expressions, but something in the commander's posture suggested he was listening carefully. The conversation moved on to other topics, but Daniel noticed that Sophie kept her reader put away for the rest of the evening, and he noticed that High Commander Noreth remained in the corner, silent and watchful, until long after everyone else had left. The evening story sessions became a regular thing. After duty shifts ended and meals were finished, soldiers from different species gathered in the mess hall to share tales from their homeworlds. It started as a way to pass time during the long patrols through empty space, but it grew into something more, a tradition, a way for the crew to bond. Sophie became the unofficial keeper of human stories. She had always loved mythology, even back on Earth. Now she had an audience that had never heard these tales before. She told them about Beowulf, the warrior who fought a monster with his bare hands. About Roland, who stood at a mountain pass and held back an entire army. About Leonidas and his 300 Spartans who refused to retreat even when facing certain death. The aliens listened. But their reactions troubled Daniel. They smiled too much, laughed at the wrong moments, treated the stories like amusing fables rather than cultural treasures. "Let me understand this," Vexthal said one evening after Sophie finished telling the story of Beowulf and Grendel. "This Beowulf fought a creature that killed 30 men at once, and he defeated it by ripping its arm off with his bare hands." "That's what the story says," Sophie confirmed. "And people believe this actually happened?" "Well, something happened. The story is based on real events, probably. The details got exaggerated over time." Vexithal's scales rippled with amusement. "Of course they did, because the truth was likely much less impressive. Perhaps Beowulf killed a large animal, and the story grew with each telling until it became a monster." Rin swirled closer, colors bright with curiosity. "Do all human myths involve impossible physical feats? Ripping arms off, fighting for days without rest, surviving wounds that should kill?" "Many of them, yes," Sophie said. "Why?" asked a Vryn medic named Kel. His gray face showed genuine confusion. "Why do humans romanticize physical suffering? Our myths celebrate wisdom and cooperation. The Felkar tells stories of great discoveries. Even the Kryn myths focus on tactical genius, not mindless endurance." "It's not mindless," Daniel said, unable to stay quiet any longer. "These stories honor sacrifice. They celebrate people who refuse to give up, even when everything seemed lost." "But they gave up their lives," Vexthal pointed out. "Most of your heroes die in these stories. That is not victory. That is failure with better publicity." Several aliens made sounds that the translators rendered as laughter. Daniel felt his face grow hot. Sophie tried again. "What about the story of the Alamo? Nearly 200 defenders held a fort against thousands of attackers for 13 days. They knew they would lose. They knew help wasn't coming. But they fought anyway to buy time for others to escape." "They all died?" Kel asked. "Yes." "Then they failed their mission? The logical choice would have been to retreat with the others." "They succeeded," Daniel said firmly. "They delayed the enemy long enough for the main force to regroup and win the war later. Their sacrifice meant something." Vexthal leaned forward, his massive frame making the chair groan. "I do not mean to insult your culture, Daniel, but consider how this sounds to us. You celebrate defeats. You honor warriors who die needlessly. You tell stories about people doing impossible things that clearly never happened. To us, this suggests humans were afraid. You needed these myths because real life was too frightening." "That's not fair," Sophie said quietly. "Is it not?" Rin chimed in, colors shifting to what might have been sympathy. "Think about it from our perspective. The Kryn have combat records going back 10,000 years. Real battles, real warriors, real victories. We do not need to invent heroes because we have actual history. The Zithar have biographical databases of every soldier who achieved distinction. Facts, not fantasy." A young Kryn warrior named Grath spoke up. "My clutch mother fought in the Battle of Sarin III. She held a position against Devourer forces for 48 hours. This is documented, verified, witnessed by hundreds. I do not need a myth about her. I have her actual service record." "Your myths are charming," Vexthal said, his tone gentler now. "They show that humans have imagination and value courage. But they are children's stories. Surely you understand that as your species matures, you will rely less on these fantasies and more on actual achievements. Daniel wanted to argue more, but what could he say? The aliens had a point. How could myths compete with documented history? How could he prove that Achilles or Beowulf or any of the ancient heroes were anything more than tall tales? He glanced around the mess hall and noticed High Commander Noreth again. The Zithar officer sat in his usual corner, eating slowly. His 4 eyes were fixed on the conversation, and Daniel could swear the commander's posture had become tense. Sophie pulled out her reader one more time. What if I told you every culture on Earth independently created similar myths? Warrior heroes who seemed invincible, soldiers who fought beyond human limits, last stands against overwhelming odds, from Europe to Asia to Africa to the Americas, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, but telling the same kinds of stories. That proves my point, Vexthal said. It shows these myths arise from universal fears. All young species fear death, fear the dark, fear the unknown. So all young species create heroes who conquer these fears. It is psychology, not history. Kell nodded his gray head. We studied this at Medical Academy. Myth-making is a developmental stage. Species create supernatural explanations for natural events until they develop scientific understanding. Humans are simply showing their evolutionary history. Sophie's shoulders slumped. She put her reader away. Do not feel bad, Vexthal said, reaching across the table to pat her shoulder with one massive hand. The gesture was meant to be comforting, but it came across as patronizing. Your myths have value as cultural artifacts. They just are not true, and that is acceptable. The Felkar had similar stories before they achieved spaceflight. Most species do. The conversation shifted to other topics. Grath told a story about his clutch mother that involved tactical brilliance and clear-headed decision-making under pressure. Kell shared a Vryn legend about a healer who developed a cure for a plague through careful research and experimentation. Even Ryn offered a Felkar tale about an engineer who designed a revolutionary engine by thinking in new ways about old problems. All their stories were grounded in reality. Possible, believable, nothing supernatural, nothing that pushed the boundaries of what their species could physically do. The evening ended, and people drifted back to their quarters. Daniel and Sophie walked together through the quiet corridors. They don't understand, Sophie said softly. No, Daniel agreed. But maybe they're right. Maybe our myths are just stories we tell ourselves to feel braver. You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. They reached the junction where their paths split. Sophie hesitated. Do you think any of it was real? Achilles? Beowulf? The Spartans? Or are we just clinging to fantasy? Before Daniel could answer, a voice spoke from the shadows. It was real. They spun around. High Commander Noreth stood in the corridor, almost invisible in the dim light. His 4 eyes reflected the soft glow of the emergency lights. Sir, Daniel said, snapping to attention. Noreth moved closer, his 6 legs making soft clicking sounds on the metal floor. The stories your lieutenant shares, they are real. Sophie's eyes widened. You believe in human mythology? I believe in what I have seen. The commander's translator gave his words a strange weight. Your companions mock stories they do not understand. They laugh at myths they have never witnessed come true. But I have served in this war for 47 years. I have seen things that would make your myths seem tame. Sir? Daniel asked, confused. Noreth was silent for a long moment. His eyes studied both of them as if measuring something. Finally, he spoke again. Continue sharing your stories, Lieutenant Martinez. Do not let their mockery silence you. Some truths can only be understood through experience. They will learn. Before either human could respond, the commander turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor. Daniel and Sophie looked at each other. "That was strange," Sophie whispered. "Very strange," Daniel agreed. They went to their quarters, but Daniel could not sleep. He kept thinking about the commander's words, the certainty in his voice, the way he had said they were real, not they might have been real or they represent deeper truths. Just real, simple and absolute. What had High Commander Noreth seen in 47 years of war? What experiences would make him believe in human myths when every other alien dismissed them as primitive fantasy? Daniel did not know, but something in the commander's tone suggested that the answer would be important, perhaps more important than anyone realized. The alarm woke Daniel from a deep sleep, not the standard drill alarm, but the real one. The sound that meant combat was imminent. He rolled out of his bunk and grabbed his gear, fingers moving on autopilot through the practiced motions of suiting up. Around him, other humans were doing the same, faces tight with tension. "All hands to battle stations," the announcement blared. "Devourer fleet detected. Multiple contacts. This is not a drill." Daniel ran through the corridors toward Engineering Section 7. Other soldiers rushed past, heading to their own stations. The ship's lighting had shifted to red, casting everything in a bloody glow. Through the windows, he could see space lighting up with weapons fire. He reached his station just as the first impact hit. The entire ship shuddered. Alarms screamed. Emergency bulkheads began sliding closed, sealing off damaged sections. Sophie arrived seconds after him, her helmet crooked. "How many ships?" "I count 15, said another human soldier named Greg. He was staring at a tactical display. "No, wait. 20. They keep coming." "We were expecting maybe 3 or 4, Daniel said. His stomach felt cold. 20 Devourer ships against 1 coalition vessel. Those were terrible odds. The radio crackled. "All sections report status." One by one, the ship's departments called in. Engineering was operational. Weapons were online. Shields were holding but taking damage. Then the reports started getting worse. Hull breach on Deck 3, casualties in Section 9, medical bays filling up fast, another impact, harder this time. The lights flickered. Daniel grabbed a support rail to keep from falling. "They're trying to board us," Greg said, his voice rising. "Boarding pods incoming." Daniel had trained for this, but training was different from reality. Devourers did not just want to destroy ships. They wanted to consume the crew. Add them to the hive mind. Every soldier lost became another enemy. "Seal all access points to engineering," he ordered. "If they breach this section, the whole ship is lost." His team moved quickly, activating additional blast doors and setting up defensive positions. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the Devourers reached them. The creatures came faster than expected. The first one tore through a ventilation shaft in the ceiling. It dropped into the middle of their position before anyone could react. Daniel got his first real look at a Devourer up close, and his training could not prepare him for the reality. It stood 7 feet tall on 4 legs. Its body was covered in black chitinous armor that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Too many eyes, too many mouths, arms ending in claws that could punch through metal. It moved wrong, like several creatures merged into one, which was exactly what it was. The hive mind wore bodies the way humans wore clothes. Greg fired first. Plasma bolts struck the creature dead center, punching holes through its armor. It did not slow down. The holes closed up, armor regenerating in seconds. It grabbed Greg and threw him across the room. He hit a support beam hard and did not get up. More Devourers poured through the breach, 5 of them, 10, too many to count. Daniel and his team fell back, firing constantly. Some of the creatures went down, but not enough. Never enough. "Section 7 is being overrun," Daniel shouted into his radio. "We need support." The response was chaos. Every section was under attack. Every section needed support. They were on their own. Sophie appeared beside him, her weapon empty. She had switched to a plasma blade, the close combat weapon glowing white-hot. "We can't hold them." "We have to. If they take engineering, they take the ship." They fought. It was brutal and desperate. For every devourer they killed, 2 more appeared. The creatures learned from each death, adapting their tactics. They stopped coming through the ventilation shafts and started cutting through walls instead. They stopped charging in groups and started attacking from multiple angles. Daniel lost track of time. Minutes blurred together. His arms ached from holding his weapon. His throat was raw from shouting orders. Beside him, Sophie was bleeding from a cut across her forehead, but she kept fighting. Then he heard it over the radio. Vexthal's voice, normally so confident, now edged with panic. "Section 12 is lost. Falling back. They're everywhere. The transmission cut off. Daniel felt cold fear grip his chest. Section 12 was where Vexthal had been stationed with his Kryn squad. If they were overrun, what chance did humans have? "Engineering, this is Bridge." High Commander Noreth's voice came through, calm despite the chaos. "I am rerouting forces to your position. Hold for 5 minutes." "We can't hold for 5 minutes," Daniel said, watching 3 more devourers tear through the wall. "You will hold," Noreth said. "I am coming to you personally." The connection ended. Daniel braced himself against a console and kept firing. 5 minutes might as well have been 5 hours. They would all be dead before help arrived. But 3 minutes later, something changed. Daniel heard it first. A sound like metal tearing. Then screaming, not human screaming, devourer screaming. He had not known they could scream. A devourer appeared in the doorway, moving backward, retreating. That was wrong. Devourers never retreated. They attacked until they died or won. But this one was backing up, its too many eyes fixed on something behind it. Then High Commander Noreth entered the room. For the first few seconds, Daniel thought the commander was fighting normally. Efficient, precise movements, taking down devourers with practiced skill. But then he really looked, and he realized something was wrong. Noreth was not fighting like a Zithar. Zithar were tactical fighters, using their 4 arms for coordinated attacks. They were strong but measured, careful. The commander was not being careful. He moved through the devourers like they were standing still. His 4 arms struck in patterns too fast to follow. When a claw raked across his chest, tearing away armor, he did not slow down. When a devourer bit into his shoulder, he ripped its jaw off and kept fighting. Blood leaked from a dozen wounds, but he did not stop. "Is he insane?" Sophie whispered. Daniel could not answer. He could only watch. The battle for Engineering Section 7 lasted another 20 minutes, but with Noreth fighting beside them, the outcome changed. Devourers began to retreat. Some tried to flee. The commander hunted them down. By the time the section was clear, the floor was covered in black ichor and broken bodies. Noreth stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard. His armor was gone, torn away during the fight. His exoskeleton was cracked in multiple places. One of his arms hung limp, but he was alive. "Status," he said, his voice steady despite his injuries. "Engineering secure, sir," Daniel managed to say. "Thanks to you." The commander nodded once, then moved toward the door. "Other sections need assistance." "Sir, you're injured. You need medical attention." "Later." Noreth disappeared into the corridor, heading toward the sounds of fighting deeper in the ship. Daniel looked at Sophie. "Did you see what I saw?" "He should be dead," she said quietly. "Those wounds. No Zithar could survive that and keep fighting." But Noreth did. For the next 18 hours, the commander moved through the ship section by section, pushing back the Devourer assault. Daniel heard reports over the radio. Noreth in Section 4, fighting alone against 15 Devourers. Noreth in Section 20, pulling wounded soldiers to safety while under fire. Noreth in the cargo bay, holding a blast door closed with his bare hands while engineers welded it shut from the other side. 18 hours, without rest, without stopping, without slowing down. When the last devourer was finally killed and the ship was secure, Daniel made his way to the medical bay. He needed treatment for burns and cuts, but mostly he needed to see if what he had witnessed was real. The medical bay was packed with injured soldiers. Vryn medics worked frantically to save the worst cases. Daniel saw Vex Thal on a bed, his red scales darkened with blood. The Kryn warrior was conscious, staring at the ceiling with an expression Daniel could not read. And in the corner, sitting on a bed while a medic treated his wounds, was High Commander Noreth. His injuries were horrifying. Plasma burns across his chest where his exoskeleton had melted. Deep cuts that exposed muscle and bone, a hole through his shoulder that should have killed him. But he sat upright, watching the medical bay with those 4 eyes, looking tired but alert. Daniel approached slowly. "Sir, I wanted to thank you. You saved our section." "I did what was necessary," Noreth replied. "Sir, can I ask you something? How did you fight for 18 hours straight? I've never seen anyone do that. Not any species." Noreth was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the medical bay buzzed with activity. Finally, the commander spoke. "Tell your lieutenant she should continue sharing her stories. The others will understand soon enough." Before Daniel could ask what that meant, alarms began blaring again. But not combat alarms. Medical alarms. A Vryn doctor rushed over to Noreth. "Commander, your readings are wrong. The scanner must be malfunctioning. It says you are human, not Zithar. That is impossible." The entire medical bay went silent. Every head turned toward the commander's bed. Noreth looked at the doctor, then at the room full of soldiers. His 4 eyes seemed sad, like he was making a decision he had hoped to avoid. Slowly, carefully, he reached up with his good arm and touched the side of his head. There was a soft click. His face shifted. The exoskeleton plating that covered his features detached with a hiss of released pressure. Underneath was the face of an old human man, weathered and scarred beyond recognition, but unmistakably human. "The scanner is not malfunctioning," Noreth said, his voice now slightly different without the exoskeleton to modify it. "I have been human all along." Nobody moved. The medical bay remained frozen in stunned silence. Every soldier, every medic, every wounded crew member stared at the human face where High Commander Noreth's insectoid features should have been. The face was old, lined with deep wrinkles and covered in scars that told stories of a lifetime of violence, but it was undeniably human. Vex Thal was the first to speak. The Kryn warrior sat up on his medical bed despite his injuries, his yellow eyes wide with shock. "This is some trick. Some malfunction with your prosthetics." "It is not a trick," the man who had been Noreth said quietly. His voice sounded different now, rougher, with an accent that suggested he came from somewhere on Earth's northern continent. "I have worn this disguise for 47 years. I am tired of wearing it." A Zithar officer stepped forward, his exoskeleton clicking with agitation. "You claim to be human? Impossible. High Commander Noreth has served with distinction since before humans even achieved spaceflight. He has 47 years of combat records, medals from 3 different wars. You cannot simply be someone else." "I am not someone else," the old man replied. "I am Noreth. I have earned every medal, fought in every battle, made every decision attributed to that name. The only thing false about me is my species." The Vryn doctor ran his scanner again, then checked the results 3 times. "The genetic analysis is clear. Human, male, approximately 70 years old biologically. This is no error." Sophie pushed through the crowd, Daniel close behind her. She stared at the old man with a mixture of shock and confusion. "But how? Why?" When humans first made contact with the Coalition, it was only 15 years ago. You've been serving for 47 years. That's impossible. The old man sighed. He looked tired, like a great weight was pressing down on him. My name is Jack Porter. I was a lieutenant on the survey ship Meridian. That was 54 years ago, long before official first contact. We encountered the Devourers in an uncharted system. Every human aboard died except me. How did you survive? Daniel asked. I fought. Jack's voice was flat, stating a simple fact. For 6 days I fought. The ship was torn apart section by section. My crew was consumed or killed. I kept moving, kept finding weapons, kept refusing to die. On the 6th day, I found a Coalition battlefield. Zithar forces had engaged the Devourers and lost. There were bodies everywhere. And there was damaged armor. He gestured to the exoskeleton components that had been removed from his body, now lying in pieces on the medical bed. I took armor from a dead Zithar soldier. It was the only way to survive. The Devourers were still hunting me. I put on the armor, activated the distress beacon, and waited. When Coalition ships arrived, they found a Zithar survivor. I did not correct them. You pretended to be an alien for 47 years? Vexthal's voice was incredulous. At first, I had no choice. The Coalition did not know humans existed yet. If I revealed myself, they would have had questions I could not answer. Questions about where humans were, how many of us there were, whether we were a threat. So I stayed silent. I learned their language, their customs. I became Norith. But later, Sophie said softly, after first contact, you could have told the truth. Jack shook his head. By then, Norith had a reputation, a combat record, respect. Revealing the truth would have ended that. And I was too valuable as Noreth to become just another human soldier. I could do more good this way. The medical bay remained silent for a long moment. Then Vexthal spoke again, his voice harder now. Your story explains your deception, but it does not explain what I saw today. You fought for 18 hours without rest. You survived wounds that would kill any soldier in the Coalition. You moved through Devourers like they were nothing. I have served with Zithar my entire career. None of them could do what you did. No species can fight like that. Jack looked at the Kryn warrior for a long moment. Then he slowly stood up from the medical bed. The Vryn doctor protested, but Jack waved him off. He pulled off the medical gown they had given him, revealing his full torso. The crew gasped. Jack's body was covered in scars, not the honorable scars of a veteran soldier, but horrible marks of wounds that should have been fatal. Plasma burns that had melted through his chest, claw marks that had torn open his abdomen, puncture wounds that had clearly gone through vital organs. And through his shoulder, still visible beneath the fresh bandage, was the hole from today's battle. A hole that went completely through his body. You asked how I fought for 18 hours, Jack said quietly. You want to know how I survived wounds that should have killed me. The answer is the same answer humans have given for thousands of years. I refused to die. Sophie stepped closer, her eyes on the scars. But that's not possible. These wounds, you should have died dozens of times. I did die, Jack said. My heart stopped twice during the Meridian incident. I drowned once when a section flooded. I lost enough blood on 3 separate occasions to kill any normal person, but each time, something in me pushed past it. Humans call it different things. Adrenaline surge, hysterical strength, fight-or-flight response, second wind. In old times, they called it berserker rage. He looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him. You laughed at Lieutenant Martinez's stories. You called them myths and legends and primitive fantasies. You said humans invented heroes because we were afraid. You were wrong. Jack turned to face Sophie directly. Tell them about Achilles again. The warrior who seemed invincible in battle. Do you know why that story survived for 3,000 years? Because someone actually did that. Someone fought so fiercely, survived so many wounds, kept coming back from injuries that should have killed them. that witnesses could not believe it was possible without divine intervention. They added the gods to the story because the truth was too hard to believe. He pointed to his chest, to the scars. Beowulf fighting a monster with his bare hands and ripping its arm off. A man using nothing but rage and determination to overcome something stronger than himself. That story survived because someone did it. The monster was probably another warrior, or an animal, or an enemy that seemed unbeatable. But someone fought like that and won. Vexthal shook his head. One person. You are describing one person doing impossible things. Your myths describe entire cultures of such warriors. Because there were entire cultures of such warriors, Jack replied. Do you think I am special? I am not. I am just a human who got pushed far enough that my body activated systems your species do not have. Every human has this capability. Most never need it. Some discover it in combat. A few, like me, learn to trigger it consciously. He walked slowly around the medical bay, his voice growing stronger. You know what your species have in common? You all evolved on worlds with natural order, stable food chains, clear hierarchies. You were predators from the beginning. Humans were not. We were prey. We were hunted by everything. Big cats, bears, wolves, other humans. We survived by being clever, yes, but also by having one final trick that saved us when cleverness failed. Jack stopped in front of a wall display showing various coalition species. When your ancestors were cornered, they fought or they died. When human ancestors were cornered, their bodies did something different, released chemicals that blocked pain, increased strength beyond normal limits, kept the heart beating even when it should stop, maintained consciousness even with fatal injuries, long enough to escape or kill the threat. Then we could die, but not before. That is not possible, a Felkar medic said, its colors swirling with doubt. Such a system would require enormous energy. It would damage the body permanently. It does, Jack said simply. He held up his hands. They shook slightly. I have arthritis in every joint. My bones have fractures that never healed properly. My organs are covered in scar tissue. My nervous system is permanently damaged. I am 70 years old, but my body is more like 120. Every time I push past normal limits, it costs me. Every time I refuse to die when I should, I pay the price later. But in the moment, when everything is on the line, none of that matters. He turned back to Sophie. You asked if the myths were real. They were. They are. Every story of a human doing impossible things is just a memory of what we actually did. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae standing against an army. They did that. Roland at Roncesvalles Pass holding the line alone. He did that. Every culture has these stories because every culture experienced them. Humans doing what should be impossible because the alternative was death. But you are one person, Vexthal insisted. One exceptional individual. That does not mean all humans can do this. Jack looked at Daniel and Sophie. Tell me, when the Devourers attacked Engineering Section 7, did you consider retreating? Daniel thought back to the battle. No. Retreat would mean losing the ship. We had to hold. And if you were alone? If everyone else was dead, and you were the only thing standing between the Devourers and the reactor core? I would have fought anyway, Daniel said quietly, until they killed me. There, Jack said, pointing at him. That is the difference. Your species fight to win. Humans fight because we refuse to lose. We will fight until we physically cannot fight anymore. And then we will fight a little longer. It is not logical. It is not efficient. But it is what we are. He sat back down on the medical bed, suddenly looking very old and very tired. Your myths are not about gods or magic. They are about humans being human, refusing to quit, refusing to die, refusing to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain. You laughed at those stories. You should have been terrified of them. The medical bay was silent again, but this time the silence felt different, heavy with understanding and something that might have been fear. Finally, Vexthal spoke. His voice was quiet, and for the first time since Daniel had met him, uncertain. The myths were warnings. Yes, Jack said. Not warnings to humans. We already knew what we were capable of. They were warnings to everything else. The news spread through the horizon's edge within hours. High Commander Noreth, the legendary Zithar warrior with 47 years of distinguished service, was human, had always been human. The revelation hit the crew like a shockwave. Some refused to believe it. Others insisted it was a devourer trick, some kind of impersonation. But the medical scans were clear. The testimony was undeniable. Jack Porter was real, and he was human. Coalition Command received the report with similar disbelief. They demanded Jack be returned to headquarters for investigation. They wanted answers about how he had fooled them for decades. They wanted to know what else humans might be hiding. But the horizon's edge was too damaged to travel quickly. Repairs would take weeks. So Jack remained aboard, confined to quarters while officials argued about what to do with him. In the mess hall, the evening story sessions had changed. The aliens no longer laughed at Sophie's myths. Instead, they listened with a new intensity, hearing the stories differently now. What had seemed like primitive fantasy suddenly felt more like warnings from the past. Sophie finished telling the story of Cuchulainn, the Irish hero who tied himself to a standing stone so he could die on his feet rather than fall. When she finished, the room was quiet. Vexthal broke the silence. That is not a story about victory. He died. He did, Sophie agreed. But he died on his terms, standing, fighting to the last breath. His enemies were so afraid of him that they would not approach his body for 3 days, until a bird landed on his shoulder and they realized he was truly dead. Fear, Rin said, colors shifting slowly. These stories are meant to create fear. They are meant to teach a lesson, Daniel said, that humans do not surrender, ever, even when we should, especially when we should. Kel, the Vryn medic, leaned forward. I have been researching human physiology since the revelation. Your species has multiple redundant systems for surviving trauma. Most species have 1 or 2. Humans have 7. Your bodies are designed to keep functioning past the point where you should be dead. Because we evolved being hunted, Sophie said. We had to survive long enough to get away. Our bodies learned to ignore things that would stop other species. Grath, the young Kryn warrior whose clutch mother had fought at Saren III, spoke up. My clutch mother held a position for 48 hours. I was proud of that record. Jack Porter fought for 6 days alone. Then he fought for 47 more years. How do I compare that? You do not, Vexthal said quietly. The big warrior had been subdued since the revelation. We cannot compare. We are different species with different capabilities. I have trained my entire life to be a warrior. I thought I understood what that meant, but I do not understand fighting the way humans do. It is not just fighting, Daniel said. It is everything. Humans who lift cars off trapped children, swimmers who survive in freezing water for hours, hikers who crawl for days with broken legs to find help. When we are pushed far enough, something activates that refuses to let us quit. At great cost, Kel added. I read Jack Porter's medical files. The damage to his body is extensive. No human should be able to walk after experiencing what he has endured. The fact that he still functions is itself remarkable. He is dying, Vexthal said bluntly. Is he not? All those years of pushing past normal limits. His body is failing. Sophie's face fell. She had not wanted to think about that. But it was true. She had seen Jack in the medical bay. He looked ancient, worn down by decades of war. Probably. He is 70 years old. For a human who has lived a normal life, that is old but not impossibly old. For someone who has done what he has done, Yes. He is dying. Then his last years will be spent answering questions from Coalition Command, Rin said sadly. Investigated like a criminal for the crime of fighting for us while being the wrong species. That is not right, Grath said firmly. He is a war hero. He saved this ship. He has saved countless ships and countless lives over 47 years. His species should not matter. Vexthal stood up, his massive frame towering over the table. You are correct. His species should not matter, but it does matter because it changes everything we thought we knew. Come with me. All of you. He led the group through the corridors to the detention section where Jack was being held. The guards were two Zithar soldiers who looked uncomfortable with their assignment. Vexthal spoke to them in their language, his tone commanding. After a brief argument, they stepped aside. Jack sat on a simple bed in a room that was comfortable, but clearly a cell. He looked up when the group entered, his old eyes tired but alert. This is unexpected. We wish to apologize, Vexthal said. He did something Daniel had never seen a Kryn do. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing his head below Jack's level. It was a gesture of deep respect, one that Kryn warriors reserved for their greatest heroes. Jack stared at him. Get up. You do not need to do that. I do, Vexthal said firmly. I mocked your stories. I laughed at your myths. I called them children's tales and primitive fantasies. I said humans needed fictional heroes because you had none in reality. I was wrong. I am sorry. One by one, the other aliens in the group did the same, lowering themselves, showing respect in the ways their cultures understood it. Even Rin, whose gaseous form could not kneel, dimmed its colors in a gesture of humility. Jack looked uncomfortable with the attention. I am not a hero. I am just a soldier who lived too long. You are what humans call a war hero, Sophie said softly. Whether you want to be or not. Heroes are supposed to inspire others, Jack said, to show them what is possible. What have I shown? That if you lie about who you are and fight until your body breaks, you can serve for 47 years? That is not inspiration. That is a warning. It is both, Daniel said. You showed us what one human can do when pushed far enough. You proved that our myths are not fantasies, and you did it while earning the respect of every species in the Coalition, even though they did not know you were human. Jack was quiet for a moment. Coalition Command wants to court-martial me. They say I committed fraud, impersonated an officer, falsified records. They are probably right by their laws. Then their laws are wrong, Vexthal said angrily. You saved my life today. You saved this entire ship. You have been saving ships and soldiers for decades. If they punish you for this, it will be the greatest injustice I have witnessed. It does not matter, Jack said tiredly. I am old. Whatever time I have left is not much. Let them have their investigation. Let them have their trial. I will answer their questions honestly. I have nothing left to hide. Sophie stepped forward. Can I ask you something? Why did you tell me to keep sharing the stories? Back before the attack, you said the others would understand soon. Did you know what was going to happen? I knew the Devourers would attack eventually, Jack said. I knew when they did, I would fight the way I always fight. And I knew that would raise questions. I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending. When you shared those myths and the others laughed, I saw a chance. If they were going to learn the truth anyway, they might as well understand what it meant. So you planned this, Daniel said. I allowed it to happen, Jack corrected. There is a difference. I could have fought more carefully today. Could have pretended to be exhausted after a few hours. Could have maintained the illusion. But I am 70 years old and tired of lying. The truth was going to come out eventually. Better now, when it could be understood, than later when it would just be confusion. Grath spoke up. What will happen to the other humans serving in disguise? Coalition Command is investigating everyone now. They are finding others like you. Jack nodded. I know. I was not the only survivor who took this path. There are 17 others scattered throughout Coalition forces. All of them hiding, all of them fighting. Now they will have to reveal themselves too. I am sorry for that. I have made their lives harder. Or you have freed them, Sophie suggested. They do not have to hide anymore. Maybe, Jack said. He did not sound convinced. The group stayed for another hour, asking questions, sharing stories, trying to understand what it meant that humanity's myths were real. Finally, the guards insisted everyone leave. As they filed out, Vexthal stopped at the door. Jack Porter, he said. When I first met you, you were High Commander Noreth. You commanded respect because of your rank and your record. Now I know you are human, and I respect you more, not less. Remember that when Coalition Command questions your worth? Jack nodded slowly. Thank you. The weeks that followed were chaotic. Coalition Command arrived with investigators. They interviewed every crew member of the Horizon's Edge. They examined 47 years of records, looking for clues they had missed. They found nothing suspicious except the impossible combat record that should have raised questions decades ago but never did because nobody had imagined the truth. The trial was brief. Jack pled guilty to falsifying his identity. He refused to apologize for it. The prosecution wanted him dishonorably discharged and stripped of his medals. But something unexpected happened. Every species in the Coalition sent representatives to speak on his behalf. Kryn warriors who had served with Noreth. Zithar officers who had been saved by his decisions. Felkar engineers who had learned from his tactics. Even Devourer war survivors who owed their lives to his actions. The judge, a stern Vryn official, listened to days of testimony. Finally, she made her ruling. Jack Porter did falsify his identity. This is a violation of Coalition law. However, his service record is without blemish. His actions have saved countless lives across multiple wars. Taking into account his age, his health, and the extraordinary circumstances of his deception, this court sentences him to time served and honorable discharge. There was silence in the courtroom. Then Vexthal started clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding. The judge banged her gavel for order but did not hide her small smile. Jack was 72 years old when he retired. He returned to Earth, to a small house in mountains he had not seen in 54 years. He lived quietly, refusing interviews, declining awards. But every year, on the anniversary of the Horizon's Edge battle, soldiers from across the Coalition would visit. They would sit with the old man and listen to his stories. Real stories, not myths. Stories of battles fought and friends lost, and the long, hard years of war. And in every Coalition training academy, cadets now studied the human capacity for endurance. They learned about adrenaline surges and hysterical strength and the biological systems that let humans fight past the point where they should be dead. They learned that humanity's myths were not fantasies, but memories, warnings from a species that refused to quit. Sophie Martinez continued sharing stories in the mess halls of Coalition ships, but now when she told tales of Achilles and Beowulf and the Spartans, nobody laughed. They listened with the respect those stories deserved. The respect that humans had always deserved, but had to earn through blood and pain and impossible endurance. The message was clear throughout the galaxy now. Humans were not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the smartest. But they were the species that did not quit. That fought until they physically could not fight anymore, and then fought a little longer. That turned impossible odds into victories through sheer refusal to accept defeat. The myths were real. They had always been real. And now the galaxy knew it.